So, went a little bit over my intro there, but that's all right. It happens. Okay, so we are up to chapter 7 of Stairway to Heaven by Zecharia Sichin, the second book in the Earth Chronicles series. This one is titled Gilgamesh, the King Who Refused to Die. The Sumerian tale of the first known search for immortality concerns a ruler of long, long ago who asked his divine godfather to let him enter the quote unquote land of the living. Of this unusual ruler, ancient scribes wrote down epic tales. They said of him that, quote, secret things he has seen, what is hidden from man he found out. He even brought tidings of the time before the deluge. He also took the distant journey, wearisome and under difficulties. He returned, and upon a stone column all his toil he engraved. End quote. Of that olden Sumerian tale, less than 200 lines have remained. Yet we know it from its translations into the languages of the people who followed the Sumerians in the Near East. Assyrians, Babylonians, Hittites, Hurrians. They all told and retold the tale, and the clay tablets on which these later versions were written down, some intact, some damaged, many fragmented beyond legibility, have enabled many scholars over the better part of a century to piece the tale together. At the core of our knowledge are 12 tablets in the Akkadian language. They were part of the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh. They were first reported by George Smith, whose job at the British Museum in London was to sort out, match, and categorize the tens of thousands of tablets and tablet fragments that arrived at the museum from Mesopotamia. One day his eye caught a fragmented text which appeared to relate the story of the deluge. There was no mistaking. The cuneiform texts from Assyria were telling of a king who sought out the hero of the deluge and heard from him a first-person account of the event. With understandable excitement, the museum director sent George Smith to the archaeological site to search for missing fragments. With luck, he found enough of them to be able to reconstruct the text and guess the sequence of the tablets. In 1876, he conclusively showed that this was, as his work was titled, the Chaldean account of the flood. From the language and style, he concluded that it, quote, was composed in Babylon circa 2000 BC, end quote. George Smith at first read the name of the king who searched for Noah Izdubur and suggested that he was none other than the biblical hero king Nimrod. For a time, scholars believed that the tale indeed concerned the very first mighty king and referred to the 12-tablet text as the Nimrod epos. More finds and much further research established the Sumerian origin of the tale and the true reading of the hero's name, Gilgamesh. It has been confirmed from other historical texts, including the Sumerian king list, that he was a ruler of Uruk, the biblical Erech, circa 2900 BC. The Epic of Gilgamesh, as this ancient literary work is now called, thus takes us back nearly 5,000 years. One must understand the history of Uruk to grasp the epic's dramatic scope. Affirming the biblical statements, the Sumerian historical records also reported that in the aftermath of the deluge, kingship, royal dynasties indeed began at Kish. It then was transferred to Uruk as a result of the ambitions of Irnini/Ishtar, who cherished not at all her domain far away from Sumer. Uruk initially was only the location of a sacred precinct where an abode, temple, for An, A-N, the Lord of Heaven, was perched atop a vast ziggurat named Eanna, House of An. On the rare occasions of An's visits to Earth, he took a liking to Irnini. He bestowed on her the title of Inanna, beloved of An. The ancient gossip, I'm sorry, the ancient gossip suggested that she was beloved in more than platonic ways, and installed her in the Iana, which otherwise stood unoccupied. But what good was a city without people, a lordship with no one to rule over? Not too far away to the south, on the shores of the Persian Gulf, Ea lived in Eridu in semi-isolation. Semi-isolation. I don't know why I'm stumbling so much tonight. There he kept track of human affairs, dispensing knowledge and civilization to mankind. Enchanting and perfumed, Inanna paid Ea, a great uncle of hers, a visit. Enamored and drunk, Ea granted her wish to make Uruk the new center of Sumerian civilization, the seat of kingship in lieu of Kish. To carry out her grandiose plans, whose ultimate goal was to break into the inner circle of the 12 great gods, Inanna Ishtar enlisted the support of her brother Utu/Shamash. Whereas in the days before the deluge, the intermarriage between the Nephilim and the daughters of man brought about the wrath of the gods, the practice was no longer frowned upon in the aftermath of the deluge, and so it was that the high priest at the temple of An was at the time a son of Shamash by a human female. Ishtar and Shamash anointed him as king of Uruk, starting the world's first dynasty of priestly kings. According to the Sumerian kings list, he ruled for 324 years. His son, quote unquote, who built Uruk, ruled for 420 years. When Gilgamesh, the fifth ruler of this dynasty, ascended the throne, Uruk was already a thriving Sumerian center, lording over its neighbors and trading with far lands. Figure 61. So I assume we're going to be seeing a map here in a minute. An offspring of the great god Shamash on his father's side, Gilgamesh was considered to be, quote, two-thirds god, one-third human, end quote, by the further fact that his mother was the goddess Ninsun, figure 62. He was thus accorded the privilege of having his name written with the prefix divine. Proud and self-assured, Gilgamesh began as a benevolent and conscientious king engaged in the customary tasks of raising the city's ramparts or embellishing the temple precinct. But the more knowledge he acquired of the histories of gods and men, the more he became philosophical and restless. In the midst of merriment, his thoughts turned to death. Would he, by virtue of his divine two-thirds, live as long as his demigod forefathers, or would his one-third prevail and determine for him the lifespan of a mortal human? Before long, he confessed his anxiety to Shamash. Let me make sure that this... Okay, it does go on. Quote, in my city man dies, oppressed is my heart, man perishes, heavy is my heart. Man the tallest cannot stretch to heaven, man the widest cannot cover the earth, end quote. The conversation goes on, but before I continue it, I'm going to show you figures 61 and 62. He kind of stuck them in the middle of the quote for some reason. Okay, so 61 must be a picture of Gilgamesh, the fifth ruler of the dynasty, because it is a picture of somebody holding a lion. So, and then the 62 is a picture of the mother goddess Ninsun, of his mother, the goddess Ninsun. Okay, so here we go. I'll show you those. They're both on the same page. So this would be Gilgamesh. Not sure what he's supposed to be holding in this hand, but it looks like a lion in this arm. And then Ninsun over here. Obviously part of a broken tablet. It cuts off at an angle there. Okay, so back to the reading. I'll start that quote again because then it goes through several other quotes in quick succession. Quote, "In my city man dies, oppressed is my heart, man perishes, heavy is my heart. Man the tallest cannot stretch to heaven, man the widest cannot cover the earth." End quote. Quote, "Will I too peer over the wall?" he asked Shamash. "Will I too be fated thus?" End quote. Evading a direct answer, perhaps not knowing it himself, Shamash attempted to have Gilgamesh accept his fate, whatever it might be, and to enjoy life while he could. Quote, "When the gods created mankind, death for mankind they allotted, life they retained in their own keeping." End quote. "Therefore," said Shamash, quote, "let full be thy belly, Gilgamesh. Make thou merry by day and night. Of each day make thou a feast of rejoicing. Day and night dance thou and play. Let thy garments be sparkling fresh. Thy head washed, bathe thou in water. Pay heed to the little one that holds thy hand. Let thy spouse delight in thy bosom, for this is the fate of mankind." End quote. But Gilgamesh refused to accept this fate. Was he not two-thirds divine and only one-third human? Why then should the lesser mortal part, rather than his greater godly element, determine his fate? Roving by daytime, restless at night, Gilgamesh sought to stay young by intruding on newlywed couples and insisting on having intercourse with the bride ahead of the bridegroom. Then one night he saw a vision which he felt was an omen. He rushed to his mother to tell her what he saw so that she might interpret the omen for him. Quote, "My mother, during the night having become lusty, I wandered about. In the midst of night omens appeared. A star grew larger and larger in the sky. The handiwork of Anu descended towards me." End quote. The handiwork of Anu that descended from the skies fell to earth near him, Gilgamesh continued to relate. Quote, "I sought to lift it, it was too heavy for me. I sought to shake it, I could neither move nor raise it." End quote. While he was attempting to shake loose the object, which must have embedded itself deep into the ground, quote, "the populace jostled toward it, the nobles thronged about it." End quote. The object's fall to earth was apparently seen by many, for, quote, "the whole of Uruk land was gathered around it." End quote. The heroes, the strong men, then lent to Gilgamesh a hand in his efforts to dislodge the object that fell from the skies. Quote, "the heroes grabbed its lower part, I pulled it up by its forepart." End quote. While the object is not fully described in the text, it was certainly not a shapeless meteor, but a crafted object worthy of being called the handiwork of the great Anu himself. The ancient reader apparently required no elaboration, having been familiar with the term handiwork of Anu, or with its depiction as possibly the one shown on an ancient cylinder seal, figure 63. Where is figure 63? Okay, this is figure 63. Okay, interesting. Maybe he'll describe it a bit here in a minute. The Gilgamesh text describes the lower part, which was grabbed by the heroes, by a term that may be translated legs. It had, however, other pronounced parts and could even be entered, as becomes clear from the further description by Gilgamesh of the night's events. Quote, "I pressed strongly its upper part. I could neither remove its covering nor raise its ascender. With a destroying fire its top then broke off and moved into its depths. Its movable, that which pulls forward, I lifted and brought it to thee." End quote. Gilgamesh was certain that the appearance of the object was an omen from the gods concerning his fate, but his mother, the goddess Ninsun, had to disappoint him. That which descended like a star from heaven, she said, foretells the arrival of, quote, a stout comrade who rescues. A friend is coming to thee. He is the mightiest in the land. He will never forsake thee. This is the meaning of thy vision, end quote. She knew what she was talking about, for unbeknown to Gilgamesh, in response to pleas from the people of Uruk that something be done to divert the restless Gilgamesh, the gods arranged for a wild man to come to Uruk and engage Gilgamesh in wrestling matches. He was called Enkidu, a creature of Enki, a kind of Stone Age man who had been living in the wilderness among the animals, and as one of them. Quote, the milk of wild creatures he was wont to suck, end quote. He was depicted naked, bearded, with shaggy hair, often shown in the company of his animal friends, figure 64. To tame him, the nobles of Uruk assigned a harlot. Enkidu, until then knowing only the company of animals, regained his human element as he made love to the woman over and over again. Then she brought Enkidu to a camp outside town where he was coached in the speech and manners of Uruk and in the habits of Gilgamesh. Quote, restrain Gilgamesh, be a match for him, end quote, the nobles told Enkidu. Let's see, 64. Figure 64 would be here, and I am assuming that this is him. Big beard, shaggy hair, arms wrapped around two animals that kind of look like two-legged deer, almost. Kind of just like the four. I don't know. They don't look right. They don't look right, but they only have two legs, and they've got tails. I don't know. I don't know what they're supposed to be, but there's all the animals. The first encounter took place at night as Gilgamesh left his palace and started to roam the streets looking for sexual adventures. Enkidu met him in the street, barring his way. Quote, they grappled each other, holding fast like bulls, end quote. Walls shook, doorposts were shattered as the two wrestled. At last, quote, Gilgamesh bent the knee, end quote. The match was over. He lost to the stranger. Quote, his fury abated, Gilgamesh turned away, end quote. Just then Enkidu addressed him, and Gilgamesh recalled his mother's words. Here, then, was his new stout friend. They kissed each other and formed a friendship. Oh, quote, they kissed each other and formed a friendship, end quote. As the two became inseparable friends, Gilgamesh began to reveal to Enkidu his fear of a mortal's fate. On hearing this, quote, the eyes of Enkidu filled with tears. Ill was his heart, bitterly he sighed, end quote. Then he told Gilgamesh that there is a way to outsmart his fate, to force his way into the secret abode of the gods. There, if Shamash and Adad would stand by him, the gods could accord him the divine status to which he was entitled. The quote-unquote abode of the gods, Enkidu related, was in the Cedar Mountain, quote-unquote. He happened to discover it, he said, as he was roaming the lands with the wild beasts, but it was guarded by a fearsome monster named Huwawa. Quote, I found it, my friend, in the mountains, as I was roaming with the wild beasts. For many leagues extends the forest. I went down into its midst. Huwawa is there. His roar is like a flood. His mouth is fire. His breath is death. The cedar forest watcher, the fiery warrior, is mighty, never resting. To safeguard the cedar forest, as a terror to mortals, the god Enlil appointed him. End quote. The very fact that Huwawa's main duty was to prevent mortals from entering the cedar forest only whetted the determination of Gilgamesh to reach the place. For surely it was there that he could join the gods and escape his mortal's fate. Quote, who, my friend, can scale heaven? Only the gods, by going to the underground place of Shamash. Mankind's days are numbered. Whatever they achieve is but the wind. Even thou art afraid of death, in spite of your heroic might. Therefore let me go ahead of thee. Let thy mouth call to me. Advance, fear not. End quote. This then was the plan. By going to, quote, the underground place of Shamash, end quote, in the Cedar Mountain to be enabled to scale heaven, quote unquote, as the gods do. Even the tallest man, Gilgamesh earlier pointed out, cannot stretch to heaven. Now he knew where the place was from which heaven could be scaled. He fell to his knees and prayed to Shamash. Quote, let me go, O Shamash. My hands are raised in prayer. To the landing place give command. Establish over me thy protection. End quote. The text's lines containing the answer of Shamash are unfortunately broken off the tablet. We do learn that, quote, when Shamash inspected his omen, tears ran down his face, end quote. Apparently he was permitted to go ahead, but at his own risk. Nevertheless, Gilgamesh decided to proceed and fight Huwawa without the god's aid. Quote, should I fail, he said, people will remember me. Gilgamesh, they will say, against fierce Huwawa has fallen, end quote. But should I succeed, he continued, I will obtain a Shem, the vehicle, quote, by which one attains eternity, end quote. As Gilgamesh ordered special weapons with which to fight Huwawa, the elders of Uruk tried to dissuade him. Quote, thou art yet young, Gilgamesh, end quote. They pointed out, and why risk death with so many sure years to live anyway, against unknown odds of success? Quote, that which thou wouldest achieve thou knowest not, end quote. Gathering all available information about the cedar forest and its guardian, they cautioned Gilgamesh, quote, we hear that Huwawa is wondrously built. Who is there to face his weapons? Unequal struggle it is with the siege engine Huwawa, end quote. But Gilgamesh only, quote, looked around smiling at his friend, end quote. The talk of Huwawa was as a mechanical monster, a siege engine that is wondrously built, only encouraged him to believe that it was indeed controllable by commands from the gods Shamash and Adad. Since he himself did not succeed in obtaining a clear-cut promise of support from Shamash, Gilgamesh decided to enlist his mother in the effort. Quote, grasping each other hand in hand, Gilgamesh and Enkidu to the great palace go, to the presence of Ninsun, the great queen. Gilgamesh came forward as he entered the palace. O Ninsun, he said, a far journey I have boldly undertaken to the place of Huwawa. An uncertain battle I am about to face, unknown pathways I am about to ride. O my mother, pray thou to Shamash on my behalf. End quote. Obliging, quote, Ninsun entered her chamber, put on a garment as beseems her body, put on an ornament as beseems her breast, donned her tiara, end quote. Then she raised her hands in prayer to Shamash, putting the onus of the voyage on him. Quote, why, she asked rhetorically, having given me Gilgamesh for a son with a restless heart, didst thou endow him, and now thou didst affect him to go on a far journey to the place of Huwawa? End quote. She called upon Shamash to protect Gilgamesh. Quote, until he reaches the cedar forest, until he has slain the fierce Huwawa, until the day he goes and returns, end quote. As the populace heard that Gilgamesh was going to, quote unquote, the landing place, after all, quote, they pressed closer to him, end quote. Why he's got to make all these little quotes, I don't know. And wished him success. The city elders offered more practical advice. Quote, let Enkidu go before thee. He knows the way. In the forest, the passes of Huwawa let him penetrate. He who goes in front saves the companion. End quote. They too invoked the blessings of Shamash. Quote, let Shamash grant thee thy desire. What thy mouth hath spoken, let him show thine eyes. May he open for thee the barred path, the road unclose for thy treading, the mountain unclose for thy foot. End quote. Ninsun had a few parting words. Turning to Enkidu, she asked him to protect Gilgamesh. Quote, although not of my womb's issue art thou, I herewith adopt thee as a son. End quote. She told him, guard the king as thy brother. Then she placed her emblem around the neck of Enkidu, and the two were off on their dangerous quest. The fourth tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh is devoted to the comrade's journey to the cedar forest. Unfortunately, the tablet is so fragmented that in spite of the discovery of parallel fragments in the Hittite language, no cohesive text could be put together. It is evident, however, that they traveled a great distance toward a western destination. On and off, Enkidu tried to persuade Gilgamesh to call off the quest. Huwawa, he said, can hear a cow moving 60 leagues away. His net can grasp from great distances. His call reverberates from the, quote, place where the rising is made, end quote. As far back as to Nippur, quote, weakness lays hold on him, end quote, who approaches the forest gates. Let us turn back, he pleaded, but proceeded they did. Quote, at the Green Mountain the two arrived. Their words were silenced. They themselves stood still. They stood still and gazed at the forest. They looked at the height of the cedars. They looked at the entrance to the forest. Where Huwawa wont to move was a path. Straight were the tracks, a fiery channel. They beheld the Cedar Mountain, abode of the gods, the crossroads of Ishtar. End quote. Awestruck and tired, the two lay down to sleep. In the middle of the night they were awakened. Quote, didst thou arouse me? End quote. Gilgamesh asked Enkidu. No, said Enkidu. No sooner had they dozed off than Gilgamesh again awakened Enkidu. He had witnessed an awesome sight, he said, unsure whether he was awake or dreaming. Quote, in my vision, my friend, the high ground toppled. It laid me low, trapped my feet. The glare was overpowering. A man appeared. The fairest in the land was he. From under the toppled ground he pulled me out. He gave me water to drink. My heart quieted. On the ground he set my feet. End quote. Who was this man, the fairest in the land, who pulled Gilgamesh from under the toppled ground? What was the overpowering glare that accompanied the landslide? Enkidu had no answers. Tired, he went back to sleep, but the night's tranquility was shattered once again. Quote, in the middle of the watch, the sleep of Gilgamesh was ended. He started up, saying to his friend, my friend, didst thou call me? Why am I awake? Didst thou not touch me? Why am I startled? Did not some god go by? Why is my flesh numb? End quote. Denying that he had awakened Gilgamesh, Enkidu left his comrade wondering whether it was some god who went by. Bewildered, the two fell asleep again, only to be awakened once more. This is how Gilgamesh described what he saw. Quote, the vision that I saw was wholly awesome. The heavens shrieked, the earth boomed. Though daylight was dawning, darkness came. Lightning flashed, a flame shot up. The clouds swelled, it rained death. Then the glow vanished, the fire went out, and all that had fallen was turned to ashes. End quote. Gilgamesh must have realized that he had witnessed the ascent of a quote-unquote sky chamber. The shaking ground as the engines ignited and roared, the clouds of smoke and dust enveloped the sight, darkening the dawn sky. The brilliance of the engine's fire seen through the thick clouds, and as the jet craft was aloft, its vanishing glow. A quote-unquote wholly awesome sight indeed. but one which only encouraged Gilgamesh to proceed, for it confirmed that he in fact had reached the landing place, quote unquote. In the morning, the comrades attempted to penetrate the forest, careful to avoid, quote, weapon trees that kill, end quote. Enkidu found the gate of which he had spoken to Gilgamesh, but as he tried to open it, he was thrown back by an unseen force. For 12 days he lay paralyzed. When he was able to move and speak again, he pleaded with Gilgamesh, quote, "Let us not go down into the heart of the forest," end quote. But Gilgamesh had good news for his comrade. While the latter was recovering from the shock, he, Gilgamesh, had found a tunnel. By the sounds heard from it, Gilgamesh was sure that it was connected to, quote, the enclosure from which words of command are issued, end quote. Come on, he urged Enkidu, quote, "Do not stand by, my friend. Let us go down together," end quote. Why does he have to quote so much of this? I don't get it. Just tell the fucking story. Gilgamesh must have been right, for the Sumerian text states that, quote, pressing on into the forest, the secret abode of the Anunnaki, he opened up, end quote. The entrance to the tunnel was grown over with or hidden by trees and bushes and blocked by soil and rocks. Quote, while Gilgamesh cut down the trees, Enkidu dug up the soil and rocks, end quote. But just as they made enough of a clearance, terror struck. Quote, Huwawa heard the noise and became angry, end quote. Now he appeared on the scene looking for the intruders. His appearance was quote, mighty, his teeth as the teeth of a dragon, his face the face of a lion, his coming like the onrushing floodwaters, end quote. Okay, that one was maybe actually a necessary quote. The rest of these are not at all. Most fearsome was his, quote, radiant beam, end quote. Emanating from his forehead, quote, it devoured trees and bushes, end quote. God, I hate this. I know, I chose to read it. It's my own damn fault. From its killing force, quote, none could escape, end quote. A Sumerian cylinder seal depicted a god, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, flanking a mechanical robot. No doubt the epic's, quote, monster with the killing beams, end quote. Figure 65. Okay, let's find 65 here. All right, here is figure 65. And in the center, I see how they get mechanical robot out of that. That's a very unusual figure compared to the other figures, especially. It is very, very strange. Okay. It appears from the fragmented text that Huwawa could armor himself with 7 cloaks, but when he arrived on the scene, only one, quote, only one he had donned, 6 are still off, end quote. Seeing this as their opportunity, the two comrades attempted to ambush Huwawa. As the monster turned to face his attackers, the killing beam from his forehead traced a path of destruction. In the nick of time, rescue appeared from the heavens. Seeing their predicament, quote, down from the skies spoke to them divine Shamash, end quote. Do not try to escape, he advised them. Instead, quote, draw near Huwawa, end quote. Then Shamash raised a host of swirling winds, quote, which beat against the eyes of Huwawa, end quote, and neutralized his beam. As Shamash had intended, quote, the radiant beams vanished, the brilliance became clouded, end quote. Soon Huwawa was immobilized. Quote, he is unable to move forward, nor is he able to move back, end quote. The two then attacked Huwawa, quote, Enkidu struck the guardian, Huwawa, to the ground. For 2 leagues the cedars resounded. End quote. So immense was the monster's fall. Then Enkidu, quote, Huwawa put to death. End quote. All of these unnecessary quotes. Very annoying. Exhilarated by their victory, but exhausted by the battle, the two stopped to rest by a stream. Gilgamesh undressed to wash himself. Quote, he cast off his soiled things, put on his clean ones, wrapped a fringed cloak about him, fastened with a sash. End quote. There was no need to rush. The way to the quote unquote secret abode of the Anunnaki, end quote, was no longer blocked. Little did he know that a female's lust would soon undo his victory. The place, as stated earlier in the epic, was the quote-unquote crossroads of Ishtar. The goddess herself was wont to come and go from this landing place. She too, like Shamash, must have watched the battle, perhaps from her aerial winged sky chamber, as depicted on a Hittite seal, figure 66. Now, having seen Gilgamesh undress and bathe, quote, glorious Ishtar raised an eye at the beauty of Gilgamesh, end quote. Approaching the hero, she minced no words about what was on her mind. Quote, come, Gilgamesh, be thou my lover, grant me the fruit of thy love. You be my man, I shall be your woman, end quote. Promising him golden chariots, a magnificent palace, lordship over other kings and princes, Ishtar was sure she had enticed Gilgamesh. But answering her, he pointed out that he had nothing he could give her, a goddess in return, and as to her love, how long would that last? Sooner or later, he said, she would rid herself of him as of, quote, a shoe which pinches the foot of its owner, end quote. Calling off the names of other men with whom she had been promiscuous, he turned her down. Enraged by this insulting refusal, Ishtar asked Anu to let the, quote, bull of heaven, end quote, smite Gilgamesh. Before we go on, let me go to figure 66. So there is our cylinder seal, figure 66. Okay. Attacked by the sky monster, Gilgamesh and Enkidu forgot all about their mission and ran for their lives. Aiding their escape back to Uruk, Shamash enabled them, quote, the distance of a month and 15 days in 3 days to traverse, end quote. But on the outskirts of Uruk, on the Euphrates River, the Bull of Heaven caught up with them. Gilgamesh managed to reach the city to summon its warriors. Outside the city walls, Enkidu alone remained to hold off the sky monster. When the Bull of Heaven snorted, pits were opened in the earth, large enough to hold 200 men each. As Enkidu fell into one of the pits, the Bull of Heaven turned around. Quickly, Enkidu climbed out and put the monster to death. What exactly the Bull of Heaven was is not clear. The Sumerian term Gud-an-na, that's Gud.an.na, could also mean Anu's attacker, his cruise missile. Ancient artists, fascinated by the episode, frequently depicted Gilgamesh or Enkidu fighting with an actual bull, with the naked Ishtar and sometimes Adad looking on, figure 67a. But from the epic's text, it is clear that this weapon of Anu was a mechanical contraption made of metal and equipped with 2 piercers, the horns, which were, quote, cast from 30 minas, M-I-N-A-S, of lapis, the coating on each being 2 fingers thick, end quote. Some ancient depictions show such a mechanical bull sweeping down from the skies, figure 67b. Okay, so let's see. Oh, here they are. Okay. So the first is 67A is Gilgamesh fighting or Enkidu fighting an actual bull with the naked Ishtar looking on. And the second is the mechanical bull sweeping down from the skies. So here we go. One of them fighting the bull, and Ishtar. Yeah, okay. And then that's supposed to be a bull. I see it's got horns, but does that really look like a bull to you? Sure don't to me. Anyway, let's move on. After the Bull of Heaven was defeated, Gilgamesh, quote, called out to the craftsmen, the armorers, all of them, end quote, to view the mechanical monster and take it apart. Then, triumphant, he and Enkidu went to pay homage to Shamash. But, quote, Ishtar in her abode set up a whale, end quote. In the palace, Gilgamesh and Enkidu were resting from night-long celebrations, but at the abode of the gods, the supreme gods were considering Ishtar's complaint. Quote, and Anu said to Enlil, because the bull of heaven they have slain, and Huwawa they have slain, the two of them must die. End quote. But Enlil said, quote, Enkidu shall die, let Gilgamesh not die. End quote. Then Shamash interceded. It was done with his concurrence. Why then should, quote, innocent Enkidu die? End quote. While the gods deliberated, Enkidu was afflicted with a coma. Distraught and worried, Gilgamesh, quote, paced back and forth before the couch, end quote, on which Enkidu lay motionless. Bitter tears flowed down his cheeks. As sorry as he was for his comrade, his thoughts turned to his own permeating anxiety. Will he too lie one day dying like Enkidu? Will he, after all the endeavors, end up dead as a mortal? In their assembly, the gods reached a compromise. The death sentence of Enkidu was commuted to hard labor in the depths of the mines, there to spend the rest of his days. To carry out the sentence and take him to his new home, Enkidu was told two emissaries, quote, clothed like birds with wings for garments, end quote, shall appear unto him. One of them, quote, a young man whose face is dark, who like a bird man is his face, end quote, shall transport him to the land of the mines. Quote, he will be dressed like an eagle. By the arm he will lead thee. Follow me, he will say. He will lead you to the house of darkness, the abode below the ground, the abode which none leave who have entered into it, a road from which there is no return. A house whose dwellers are bereft of light, where dust is in their mouths and clay is their food. End quote. That sounds like a nasty little place. An ancient depiction on a cylinder seal illustrated the scene, showing a winged emissary, angel, he has in parentheses, leading Enkidu by the arm, figure 68. Hearing the sentence passed on his comrade, Gilgamesh had an idea. Not far from the land of mines, he had learned, was the land of the living, the place whereto the gods had taken those humans who were granted eternal youth. It was, quote, the abode of the forefathers who by the great gods with the purifying waters were anointed, end quote. There, partaking of the food and beverage of the gods, having been residing, quote, princes born to the crown, who had ruled the land in days of yore, like Anu and Enlil, spiced meats they were served, from water skins cool water to them is poured, end quote. Okay. Real quick, we have figure 68, which was another cylinder seal showing the winged emissary leading Enkidu. So here we go. So we have the winged emissary, and it looks like Enkidu still likes to be naked. All right. Okay, where was I? Oh, okay. Was it not the place whereto the hero of the Deluge, Ziasudra, Utnapishtim, had been taken, the very place from which Etana, quote, to heaven ascended, end quote? And so it was that, quote, the Lord Gilgamesh toward the land of the living set his mind, end quote. Announcing to the revived Enkidu that he would accompany him at least on part of his journey, Gilgamesh explained, quote, O Enkidu, when the mighty wither meet the fated end, therefore the land I would enter, I would set up my Shem in the place where the Shems have been raised up. I, a Shem, I would raise up, end quote. However, proceeding from the land of the mind to the land of the living was not a matter for a mortal to decide. In the strongest possible words, Gilgamesh was advised by the elders of Uruk and his goddess mother to first obtain the permission of Utu/Shamash. Quote, if the land thou wish to enter, inform Utu, the hero Utu. The land it is in Utu's charge, the land which with the cedars is aligned, it is the hero Utu's charge, inform Utu, end quote. Thus forewarned and advised, Gilgamesh offered a sacrifice to Utu and appealed for his consent and protection. O Utu, quote, O Utu, the land I wish to enter, be thou my ally. The land which with the cool cedars is aligned, I wish to enter, be thou my ally. In the places where the Shems have been raised up, let me set up my Shem, end quote. At first, Utu/Shamash doubted whether Gilgamesh could qualify to enter the land. Then, yielding to more pleading and prayers, he warned him that his journey would be through a desolate and arid area. Quote, the dust of the crossroads shall be thy dwelling place, the desert shall be thy bed. Thorn and bramble shall skin thy feet, thirst shall smite thy cheeks. End quote. Unable to dissuade Gilgamesh, he told him that the, quote, place where the Shems have been raised, end quote, is surrounded by 7 mountains, and the passes guarded by fearsome mighty ones, quote unquote, who can unleash a scorching fire or a lightning which cannot be turned back. But in the end, Utu gave him, quote, the tears of Gilgamesh, gave in. Quote, the tears of Gilgamesh he accepted as an offering. Like one of mercy, he showed him mercy. End quote. But, quote, the Lord Gilgamesh acted frivolously, end quote. Rather than take the harsh overland road, he planned to cover most of the route by a comfortable sea voyage. After landing at the distant destination, Enkidu would go to the land of mines, and he, Gilgamesh, would proceed to the land of the living. He selected 50 young, unattached men to accompany him and Enkidu and be rowers of the boat. Their first task was to cut and haul back to Uruk special woods from which the Magan boat, a ship of Egypt, quote unquote, was built. The smiths of Uruk fashioned strong weapons. Then, when all was ready, they sailed away. They sailed by all accounts down the Persian Gulf, planning no doubt to circumnavigate the Arabian Peninsula and then sail up the Red Sea toward Egypt. But the wrath of Enlil was swift to come. Had not Enkidu been told that a young angel would take him by the arm and bring him to the land of mines? How come, then, he was sailing with the joyful Gilgamesh with 50 armed men in a royal ship? At dusk, Utu, who may have seen them off with great misgiving, quote, with lifted head went away, end quote. The mountains along the distant coast, quote, became dark, shadows spread over them, end quote. Then, quote, standing alongside the mountain, end quote. Yeah, why was that quote necessary? There was someone who, like Huawa, could emit rays, quote, from which none can escape, end quote. Quote, like a bull he stood on the earth, on the great earth house, end quote. A watchtower, it seems. The fearsome watchman must have challenged the ship and its passengers, for fear overcame Enkidu. Let us turn back to Uruk, he pleaded, but Gilgamesh would not hear of it. Instead, he directed the ship toward the shore, determined to fight the watchman, quote, that man, if a man he be, or if a god he be, end quote. It was then that calamity struck. The, quote, three-ply cloth, end quote, the sail, tore apart. As if by an unseen hand, the boat capsized and all in it sank down. Somehow Gilgamesh managed to swim ashore, so did Enkidu. Back in the waters, they saw the sunken ship with its crew still at their posts, looking amazingly alive in their deaths. Quote, after it had sunk in the sea, had sunk on the eve when the Magan boat had sunk, after the boat destined to Magan had sunk, inside it, as though still living creatures, were seated those who of a womb were born, end quote. They spent the night on the unknown shore, arguing which way to go. Gilgamesh was still determined to reach the land. Enkidu advised seeking a way back to the city, Uruk. Soon, however, weakness overcame Enkidu. With passionate comradeship, Gilgamesh exhorted Enkidu to hold on to life. Quote, my little weak friend, he fondly called him, to the land I will bring thee. End quote. He promised him, but, quote, death which knows no distinction, end quote, could not be held off. For 7 days and 7 nights Gilgamesh mourned Enkidu, quote, until a worm fell out of his nose, end quote. At first he wandered aimlessly, quote, God. For his friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh weeps bitterly as he ranges over the wilderness. With woe in his belly, fearing death, he roamed the wilderness, end quote. Again he was preoccupied with his own fate, fearing death, wondering, quote, when I die, shall I not be like Enkidu, end quote. When his determination to ward off his fate took hold of him again, quote, must I lay my head inside the earth and sleep through all the years, end quote. He demanded to know of Shamash, quote, let mine eyes behold the sun, let me have my fill of light, end quote. He begged of the god, setting his course by the rising and setting sun, quote, to the wild cow, to Utnapishtim, the son of Ubartutu, he took the road, end quote. He trod unbeaten paths, encountering no man, hunting for food. Quote, what mountains he had climbed, what streams he had crossed, no man can know, end quote. The ancient scribes sadly noted. I'm really tired of these quotes. So tired of them. You chose this. Keep on going. At long last, as versions found at Nineveh and at Hittite sites relate, he neared habitations. He was coming to a region dedicated to Sin, the father of Shamash. Quote, when he arrived at night at a mountain pass, Gilgamesh saw lions and grew afraid. End quote. Followed immediately by another quote. Quote, he lifted his head to Sin and prayed, to the place where the gods rejuvenate. My steps are directed. Preserve thou me. End quote. Followed by yet another quote. As at night he lay, he awoke from a dream, end quote, which he interpreted as an omen from Sin that he would, quote unquote, rejoice in life. encouraged Gilgamesh, quote, like an arrow descended among the lions, end quote. His battle with the lions has been commemorated pictorially not only in Mesopotamia but throughout the ancient lands, even in Egypt. Figures 69a, b, and c, which are right here. Gilgamesh fighting the lions. So I'll go ahead and show those to you. Three different depictions of Gilgamesh fighting lions, grabbing them by the tail. In this one, fighting them off there. That one's biting that one's ass. Fighting off another lion there. After daybreak, Gilgamesh traversed a mountain pass. In the distance below, he saw a body of water like a vast lake, quote, driven by long winds, end quote. In the plain adjoining the inland sea, he could see a city, quote, closed up about, end quote, a city surrounded by a wall. There, quote, the temple of Sin was dedicated, end quote. Outside the city, quote, by the low-lying sea, end quote, Gilgamesh saw an inn. As he approached, he saw the quote, ale woman Siduri, end quote. She was holding, quote, a jug of ale, a bowl of golden porridge, end quote. Why? Why? Why do we need that? But as she saw Gilgamesh, she was frightened by his appearance. Quote, he is clad in skins, his belly is shrunk, his face is like a wayfarer from afar, end quote. Understandably, quote, as the ale woman saw him, she locked the door, she barred the gate, end quote. With great effort, Gilgamesh convinced her of his true identity and good intentions, telling her of his adventures and quest. After Siduri let him rest, eat, and drink, Gilgamesh was eager to continue. What is the best way to the land of living? He asked Siduri. Must he circle the sea and wind his way through the desolate mountains, or could he take a shortcut across the body of water? Wind his way through. Quote, now, ale woman, which is the way? What are its markers? Give me its markers. Suitably by the sea I will go across. Otherwise by the wilderness my course will be, end quote. The choice, it turned out, was not that simple, for the sea he saw was the sea of death, quote unquote. Quote, the ale woman said to him, to Gilgamesh, the sea, Gilgamesh, it is impossible to cross. From days of long ago no one arrived from across the sea. Valiant Shamash did cross the sea, but other than Shamash, who can cross it? Toilsome is the crossing, desolate is its way, barren are the waters of death, which it encloses. How then, Gilgamesh, wouldst thou cross the sea? End quote. As Gilgamesh remained silent, Siduri spoke up again, revealing to him that there might be, after all, a way to cross the sea of the waters of death. Quote, Gilgamesh, there is Urshanabi, boatman of Utnapishtim, with him are tillings that float. In the woods he picks the things that bind together. Go, let he thy face behold. If it be suitable with thee, he shall cross. If it be not suitable, draw thou back. End quote. Following her directions, Gilgamesh found Urshanabi, the boatman. After much questioning as to who he was, how he had come hither and where he was going, he was found worthy of the boatman's services. Using long poles, they moved the raft forward. In 3 days, quote, a run of a month and 15 days, end quote, a 45-day journey overland, quote, they left behind, end quote. He arrived at Tilmun, the land of the living. Where to shall he go now? Gilgamesh wondered. You have to reach a mountain, Urshanabi answered. Quote, the name of the mountain is Mashu, end quote. The instructions given by Urshanabi are available to us from the Hittite version of the epic, fragments of which were found in Bogaskoy and other Hittite sites. From those fragments, as put together by Johann Friedrich in Die something about the Gilgamesh epic. I am not I'm not going to butcher that. We learned that Gilgamesh was held to reach and follow a regular way, quote unquote, which leads toward, quote, the great sea which is far away, end quote. He was to look for 2 stone columns or markers which Urshanabi vouched, quote, to the destination always bring me, end quote. There he had to turn and reach a town named Itla, sacred to the god whom the Hittites called Uluya, he of the peaks. He had to obtain that god's blessing before he could go farther. Following the directions, Gilgamesh did arrive at Itla. In the distance, the great sea could apparently be seen. There, Gilgamesh ate and drank, washed and made himself once again presentable as befits a king. There Shamash once again came to his aid, advising him to make offerings to Uluya. Taking Gilgamesh before the great god, figure 70, he urged Uluya accept his offerings, quote-unquote, grant him life. But Kumarbi, another god well known from Hittite tales, strongly objected. Immortality cannot be granted to Gilgamesh, he said. Figure 70. There we are. So this is Shamash taking Gilgamesh to Uluya. Here you go. I assume this is Uluya that's standing on the rock formations or whatever they're supposed to be. Okay, where are we at? Realizing it appears that he would not be granted a Shem, Gilgamesh settled for second best. Could he at least meet his forefather Utnapishtim? As the gods delayed their decision, Gilgamesh, with the connivance of Shamash, left town and started to advance toward Mount Mashu, stopping each day to offer sacrifices to Uluya. After 6 days he came unto the mountain. It was indeed the place of the Shems. Quote, the name of the mountain is Mashu. At the mountain of Mashu he arrived, where daily the Shems he watched as they depart and come in, end quote. The mount's functions required it to be connected both to the distant heavens and to the far reaches of earth. Quote, on high to the celestial band it is connected, below to the lower world it is bound, end quote. There was a way to go inside the mount, but the entrance, the gate, was closely guarded. Quote, rocket men guard its gate. Their terror is awesome. Their glance is death. Their dreaded spotlight sweeps the mountains. They watch over Shamash as he ascends and descends. End quote. Depictions have been found showing winged beings or divine bullmen operating a circular beaming device mounted on a post. They could well be ancient illustrations of the, quote, dreaded spotlight that sweeps the mountains, end quote. Figures 71A, B, and C, which we have right here. 71A, B, and C. They are working some kind of wheel there in all three of them. Okay, am I done there? Yeah, okay. Quote, when Gilgamesh beheld the terrible glowing, his face he shielded. Regaining his composure, he approached them. End quote. When the rocket men saw that the dreaded ray affected Gilgamesh only momentarily, he shouted to his partner, quote, he who comes of the flesh of the gods is his body, end quote. The rays, it appears, could stun or kill humans, but were harmless to the gods. Allowed to approach, Gilgamesh was asked to identify himself and account for his presence in the restricted area. Describing his partly divine origins, he explained that he had come, quote unquote, in search of life. He wished, he said, to meet his forefather Utnapishtim. Quote, on account of Utnapishtim, my forefather, have I come, he who the congregation of the gods had joined. About death and life I wish to ask him. End quote. Quote, never was this achieved by a mortal, end quote, the two guards said. Undaunted, Gilgamesh invoked Shamash and explained that he was two-thirds god. What happened next is unknown due to the breaks in the tablet, but at last the rocket men informed Gilgamesh that permission was granted. Quote, the gate of the mount is open to thee, end quote. The gate to heaven was a frequent motif on Near Eastern cylinder seals, depicting it as a winged ladder-like gateway leading to the tree of life. It was sometimes guarded by serpents, figure 72, which will be coming up here, wherever that is. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay, there's 72. Well, there's a couple other things there. We'll see if he describes them first. Gilgamesh went in following the quote unquote path taken by Shamash. His journey lasted 12 Beru, double hours. Through most of it, quote, he could see nothing ahead or behind, end quote. Perhaps he was blindfolded, for the next text stresses that, quote, for him light there was none, end quote. In the 8th double hour, the 16th hour, he screamed with fear. In the 9th, quote, he felt a north wind fanning his face, end quote, followed by another quote, when 11 Beru he attained, dawn was breaking, end quote. Finally, at the end of the 12th double hour, in brightness he resided, quote unquote. He could see again, and what he saw was astounding. He saw, quote, an enclosure as of the gods, end quote, wherein there grew a garden made up entirely of precious stones. The magnificence of the place comes through the mutilated ancient lines. Quote, as its fruit it carries carnelians, its vines too beautiful to behold. The foliage is of lapis lazuli, and grapes too lush to look at of stones are made. It's of white stones. In its waters pure reeds of sasu stones, like a tree of life and a tree of that of Angug stones are made. So those breaks are missing words. Um, sorry, end quote. On and on the description went. Thrilled and amazed, Gilgamesh walked about the garden. He was clearly in a simulated, quote unquote, Garden of Eve. Okay, so here is that gateway, that winged ladder like gateway. Here, guarded by serpents in this one, guarded by serpents in this one. What happened next is still unknown, for an entire column of the ninth tablet is too mutilated to be legible. Either in the artificial garden or somewhere else, Gilgamesh finally encountered Utnapishtim. His first reaction on seeing a man from days of yore, quote unquote, was to observe how much they looked alike. Quote, Gilgamesh said to him, to Utnapishtim, the far away, as I look upon thee, Utnapishtim, thou art not different at all, even as I art thou. End quote. Then Gilgamesh came straight to the point. Quote, tell me, how joinest thou the congregation of the gods in thy quest for life? End quote. In answer to this question, Utnapishtim said to Gilgamesh, quote, I will reveal to thee, Gilgamesh, a hidden matter, a secret of the gods I will tell thee. End quote. The secret was the tale of the deluge, how when he, Utnapishtim, was the ruler of Shuruppak, and the gods resolved to let the deluge annihilate mankind, Enki secretly instructed him to build a special submersible vessel and take aboard his family, quote, and the seed of all living things, end quote. A navigator provided by Enki directed the vessel to Mount Ararat. As the waters began to subside, he left the vessel to offer sacrifices. The gods and goddesses who circled Earth in their spacecraft while it was inundated also landed on Mount Ararat, savoring the roasting meat. Finally, Enlil too landed and broke into a rage when he realized that in spite of the oath taken by all the gods, Enki enabled mankind to survive. But when his anger subsided, Enlil saw the merit of such survival. It was then, Utnapishtim continued to recount, that Enlil granted him everlasting life. Quote, thereupon Enlil went aboard the ship. Holding me by the hand, he took me aboard. He took my wife aboard and made her kneel by my side. Standing between us, he touched our foreheads to bless us. Hitherto Utnapishtim has been human. Henceforth Utnapishtim and his wife, like gods, shall be unto us. Far away shall the man Utnapishtim reside, at the mouth of the water streams. End quote. And so it came to pass, Utnapishtim concluded that he was taken to the faraway abode to live among the gods. But how could this be achieved for Gilgamesh? Quote, but now who will for thy sake call the gods to assembly, that the life which thou seekest thou mayest find? End quote. On hearing the tale and realizing that it is only the gods in assembly who can decree eternal life, and that he on his own could not attain it, Gilgamesh fainted. For 6 days and 7 nights he was totally knocked out. Sarcastically, Utnapishtim said to his wife, quote, behold this hero who seeks life, from mere sleep as mist he dissolves. End quote. Throughout his sleep, they attended to Gilgamesh to keep him alive, quote, that he may return safe on the way by which he came, that through the gate by which he entered he may return to his land. End quote. Urshanabi, the boatman, was called to take Gilgamesh back, but at the last moment, when Gilgamesh was ready to leave, Utnapishtim disclosed to Gilgamesh yet another secret. Though he could not avoid death, he told him, there was a way to postpone it. He could do this by obtaining the secret plant which the gods themselves eat to keep forever young. Quote, Utnapishtim said to him, to Gilgamesh, thou hast come hither toiling and straining. What shall I give thee, that thou mayest return to thy land? I will disclose, O Gilgamesh, a hidden thing, a secret of the gods I will tell thee. A plant there is, like a prickly berry bush is its root. Its thorns are like a briar's vines. Thine hands they will prick. If thine hands obtain the plant, new life thou wilt find. End quote. The plant, we learn from what followed, grew underwater. Quote, no sooner had Gilgamesh heard this than he opened the water pipe. He tied heavy stones to his feet. They pulled him down into the deep. He saw then the plant. He took the plant, though it pricked his hands. He cut the heavy stones from his feet. The second cast him back where he came from. End quote. Going back with Urshanabi, Gilgamesh triumphantly said to him, quote, Urshanabi, this plant is of all plants unique. By it a man can regain his full vigor. I will take it to ramparted Uruk, there the plant to cut and eat. Let its name be called Man becomes young in old age. Of this plant I shall eat, and to my youthful state shall I return. End quote. A Sumerian cylinder seal from circa 1700 BC, which illustrated scenes from the epic tale, shows at left a half-naked and unkempt Gilgamesh battling the two lions. On the right, Gilgamesh holds up to Urshanabi the plant of everlasting youth. A god in the center holds an unusual spiral tool or weapon, figure 73. So let's look at figure 73. So the unkempt Gilgamesh fighting the lions, the god in the center with the spiral thing, a scorpion standing on its tail, and there he is with the plant. But fate, as with all those who in the millennia and centuries that followed went in the search of the plant of youth, intervened. As Gilgamesh and Urshanabi, quote, prepared for the night, Gilgamesh saw a well whose water was cool. He went down to it to bathe in the water, end quote. Then calamity struck. Quote, a snake sniffed the fragrance of the plant. It came and carried off the plant, end quote. Quote, thereupon Gilgamesh sits down and weeps, his tears running down his face. He took the hand of Urshanabi, the boatman, for whom he asked, have my hands toiled? For whom is spent the blood of my heart? For myself I have not attained the boon. For a serpent a boon I affected. End quote. Yet another Sumerian seal illustrates the epic's tragic end. The winged gateway in the background, the boat navigated by Urshanabi, and Gilgamesh struggling with the serpent. Not having found immortality, he is now pursued by the angel of death. Figure 74. Okay, so let's look at 74. Okay. Is this supposed to be the snake, the intertwined, almost caduceus looking thing there? Um, okay. And so it was that for generations thereafter, scribes copied and translated, poets recited, and storytellers related the tales of the first futile search for immortality, the epic tale of Gilgamesh. This is how it began. Quote, let me make known to the country him who the tunnel has seen, of him who knows the seas. Let me the full story tell. He has visited the break there as well, the hidden from wisdom all things, secret things he has seen. What is hidden from man he found out. He even brought tidings of the time before the deluge. He also took the distant journey. Wearisome and under difficulties, he returned, and upon a stone column all his toil he engraved. End quote. We read that at the beginning of the chapter, I think. And this, according to the Sumerian king list, is how it all ended. The divine Gilgamesh, whose father was a human, a high priest of the temple precinct, ruled 126 years. Ur-Lugal, son of Gilgamesh, ruled after him. I think that was supposed to be a quote, but there were no quotation marks. That is the end of that chapter. The next chapter, chapter 8, is Riders of the Clouds. Bear with me a second. So that's chapter 8. And there are 14 chapters, just so you know. So we're beyond halfway, or we're actually right at the halfway mark, I should say. Because we're starting into chapter 8, so that is exactly the beginning of the halfway, or we're at exactly the halfway mark. That's what I'm trying to say. Anyway, that'll be that for tonight. I'm going to try to read Star Wars tomorrow night, but it seems to not be working out very well for me lately. So I may have to work out a different night to do the Star Wars readings. But anyway, it was a good chapter, but an annoying one to read out loud because of all those quotes. Just endless, endless quotes. All right. So I will see you all tomorrow night or Friday, whichever one I end up being able to do next. Um, until then, have a good night.